In the folds of the Appalachian Mountains lies Ridgeback County. It's a place where time doesn't so much pass as it curdles. The hollows hold the morning fog like a secret, and the whispers of old tragedies cling to the pine needles and the damp black earth. People here live by a code etched in stone and silence. They are good neighbors, quick with a helping hand and a covered dish, but their front doors are thick and their secrets are their own. The Miller house was no exception. It sat on a well-tended plot of land, a testament to hard work and quiet dignity, a perfect picture of the Ridgeback dream. Until the night the dream died, screaming. Frank Miller was a man made of the same rock and dirt as the county itself. In his late 40s, with a sun-weathered face and hands as tough as old leather, he ran a small excavating company. He was a good provider, a man who spoke more through his labor than with his words. He was the king of his small castle, and his queen was Helen. Helen Miller at 42 was the very picture of a devoted wife, quiet, diligent, with a grace that seemed out of place in the rough-hewn county. Her house was immaculate, the scent of lemon polish and fresh laundry a constant comforting presence. Her garden bloomed with a fierce, controlled beauty. At church bake sales, her apple pies were the first to go. The women in town spoke of her with a mix of admiration and pity. "That Helen," they'd say over coffee at the town diner. "She works herself to the bone for that man, a true saint." She was the quiet, steady rhythm of Frank's life, the clean sheets he came home to, the hot meal waiting on the table. On that last night, the meal was his favorite, a rich, slow-cooked beef stew, the kind that fills a house with the aroma of home and hearth. Frank had just returned from a 2-week job clearing land for a new development over in the next state. He was tired, his muscles aching with the good, honest pain of a job well done. He ate with a hunger that was almost primal, spooning the thick, dark gravy over a piece of cornbread. "It tastes different tonight, Helen," he said midway through his second helping. "A little bitter." Helen, sitting across from him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, offered a small, placid smile. "I tried a new herb from the garden, dear. For strength, you work so hard." Frank grunted, accepting the explanation. He trusted her. He trusted the food she put before him, the life she had built around him. He finished the bowl, scraping the sides clean. The pain started about an hour later, a low, insidious cramp in his gut. He dismissed it as indigestion, but the cramp grew, coiling in his belly like a hot snake. It became a fire, a searing, twisting agony that made him double over. He stumbled to the bathroom, a sheen of cold sweat on his forehead. Vomit erupted from him, violent and acidic. He collapsed to the cold tile floor, his body a battlefield. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. His powerful limbs began to twitch, then convulse, his muscles knotting in a rebellion he couldn't control. Helen found him there. Her scream was a perfectly pitched instrument of panic and grief. She called 911, her voice trembling, telling the operator her husband had collapsed, that he couldn't breathe. By the time the paramedics arrived, their sirens wailing a mournful song that echoed through the hollow, Frank Miller was gone. His eyes were open, wide with a final, uncomprehending horror. His strong, capable hands were clenched into fists, still fighting a war he had already lost. The initial report from the coroner was inconclusive but troubling. Probable cause, a sudden, catastrophic cardiac event. But something about it felt wrong. The violence of the symptoms, the speed of his decline, it was too fast, too brutal. Detective Miles Corrigan felt it the moment he stepped into the Miller house. The air was thick with the lingering smell of stew and something else. The sterile, sharp scent of bleach. Helen Miller, the grieving widow, sat on a pristine sofa, dabbing at her dry eyes with a perfectly folded handkerchief. She looked the part. Her face was etched with sorrow, her voice a fragile whisper as she recounted the evening's horrific events. But Corrigan, a man whose career was built on seeing the cracks in a perfect facade, noticed something else. For a fleeting moment, as she described Frank's final agonizing convulsions, a look passed through her eyes. It wasn't grief. It was a cold, flat, reptilian stillness. It was there and then it was gone, replaced once more by the mask of the heartbroken wife. But Corrigan had seen it, and it was enough. He walked through the house, a ghost in the temple of a dead man. Everything was in its place. The kitchen was spotless, the counters wiped clean, the dishes washed and put away. In the trash, beneath a layer of coffee grounds, he found the remains of the stew, neatly scraped from the pot. He bagged it as evidence, a standard procedure that felt anything but. He was looking for a ghost, a flicker of chaos in this house of perfect order. But there was none. Helen Miller had erased it all. The autopsy report came back 3 days later and blew the case wide open. Frank Miller hadn't had a heart attack. He had been poisoned. The toxin was potent, vicious, and disturbingly specific. It was a neurotoxin derived from a plant, something the old-timers in the mountains had a name for. They called it devil's breath. It grew in the deep, damp, shaded parts of the woods, a plant with delicate, lacy leaves and a flower as white and innocent as a lie. It was a local horror story, a plant so toxic that even touching it could cause a rash. Ingested, it was a death sentence. It attacked the nervous system, paralyzing the diaphragm, turning the body into its own suffocating prison. The death was brutal, agonizing, and absolute. Frank Miller had been murdered, and the last person to feed him was his doting, heartbroken wife. Corrigan brought her in for questioning. She sat in the cold, grey interview room, a picture of wounded innocence. She wept softly when he told her Frank had been poisoned. Poisoned? My Frank? Who would do such a thing? Her performance was flawless. Corrigan let her cry. Then he asked about the stew. He asked about the new herb she had used. I don't know the name, she stammered, twisting the handkerchief in her hands. It was just a little green leaf. An old woman at the market told me it was good for vitality. I didn't know. She denied everything. She claimed to know nothing of devil's breath, nothing of wild herbs. She was a simple housewife who used the spices from the grocery store and the rosemary and thyme from her neat, orderly garden. Her story was a fortress of domesticity, and Corrigan had no weapons to breach its walls, not yet. He started digging into Frank Miller's life, trying to find a reason someone would want him dead. By all accounts, he was a straight shooter, a tough boss, but fair. He paid his debts. He had no known enemies. But a conversation with Frank's best friend, a grizzled mechanic named Dave, painted a different picture. Frank was restless, Dave said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He loved Helen, I guess, but he felt smothered. That's the word he used, smothered, by all the niceness. He said sometimes he felt like he was living in a dollhouse, and he was afraid he'd break something. Dave told Corrigan about Frank's frequent work trips, but he also mentioned other trips, unexplained weekends, mysterious cash withdrawals from the bank. Frank was hiding something, or someone. The investigation led Corrigan to a small, unassuming town 100 miles away, and to a woman named Savannah Reed. She was young, pretty, with tired eyes and a fierce, protective love for her 6-year-old son, Dylan. And when Corrigan showed her a picture of Frank Miller, her face crumpled. She told him everything. The affair had been going on for 7 years. Frank was the love of her life. He was Dylan's father. He visited every few weeks, a ghost father who brought presents and cash and promises. He had promised her he would leave his wife soon, when the time was right. He said Helen was fragile, that he couldn't just walk away. The motive was now clear, a classic sordid triangle, but it didn't point to Helen. It pointed away from her. If anyone had a motive to be angry, it was the woman who had been kept a secret for 7 years. But Savannah Reed had a rock-solid alibi for the night of the murder. She was working a double shift as a waitress seen by dozens of people. The focus swung back to Helen, the quiet, saintly wife, the woman who had been betrayed for nearly a decade. Corrigan was convinced she knew. The question was, how did she find out? And how could he prove she was the one who had picked the devil's breath and stirred it into her husband's last meal? The break came from an unlikely source, an old man named Jedediah Hemlock, a recluse who lived in a small cabin deep in the woods that bordered the Miller property. Corrigan found him on his porch whittling a piece of wood. "Yeah, I seen her," Jedediah said, not looking up from his work. "About 3 weeks ago, saw her coming down from the ridge, from the hollow where the creek runs dark. She was carrying a small basket, moved quiet like she didn't want to be seen. The hollow where the creek runs dark. Corrigan knew the place. It was infamous. It was one of the few places in the county where devil's breath grew in abundance. When Corrigan confronted Helen with this new information, she faltered for the first time. Her eyes widened in panic before she could school her features back into a look of confusion. The ridge? Oh, yes. I was looking for wildflowers, for the table. I didn't find any. Her explanation was weak, flimsy, a lie so thin he could see the truth right through it. He got a warrant. He and his team descended on the Miller house, this time not as respectful guests, but as invaders. They turned the pristine home upside down, and in the back of a kitchen drawer behind a stack of neatly folded dish towels, they found it. A small, heavy granite mortar and pestle, the kind used for grinding spices. It was clean, scrubbed almost raw, but under a forensic microscope, deep in the porous surface of the stone, the lab found what they were looking for. Microscopic flecks of green, trace evidence of the very same plant that had killed Frank Miller. The poison had been prepared here, in this kitchen with this tool, by Helen's own hands. The chain of evidence was almost complete, but Corrigan needed one more link. He needed to prove premeditation. He needed to show that this wasn't a crime of passion, but a cold, calculated execution. He started re-interviewing the neighbors, and another piece of the puzzle fell into place. A woman who lived across the road remembered something odd. About a week before Frank's death, she'd seen Helen in her backyard, digging a small hole near the compost heap. It was late in the evening. The woman had thought it was strange, but had dismissed it. Corrigan took a shovel and went to the spot she had indicated. He dug into the soft, dark earth. About a foot down, the shovel hit something soft. He knelt and carefully brushed away the dirt. It was a chicken, one of the hens from the coop Helen kept in the yard. It was wrapped in a plastic bag. He sent the bird to the lab. The report came back the next day. The chicken had died from a massive dose of the same toxin that had killed Frank Miller. The full, horrifying picture was now complete. The trip to the hollow to harvest the leaves, grinding the poison in her mortar, and then the test. The cold, scientific trial run on an unsuspecting animal to gauge the dosage to ensure its lethality. This wasn't a grieving widow. This was a methodical, patient killer. He brought Helen Miller in one last time. He didn't ask her questions. He told her a story. He told her about a woman who went into the woods. He told her about a mortar and pestle. He told her about a dead chicken buried in the garden. He laid out the evidence piece by damning piece on the table between them. With each new fact, a layer of her composure was stripped away. The mask of the grieving widow melted, not into tears, but into something far more terrifying, a calm, chilling emptiness. She was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the sterile table. Then she looked up at Corrigan, and the coldness he had seen on the first day was back, no longer fleeting, but a permanent glacial winter in her eyes, and she began to talk. Her voice was not the whisper of a victim. It was the flat, steady voice of a judge delivering a sentence. He was a ghost in his own house. She said, he was there, but he wasn't. His body was at my table, but his heart, his life was somewhere else. For years I felt it, a cold draft in our marriage, a hollowness. I thought it was just men, the way they are. They work, they provide, they don't talk. I made excuses for him. I made his home perfect. I thought if I was a good enough wife, the coldness would go away. The change came a month ago, a casual conversation, her friend Brenda at the diner. Brenda was complaining about her own brother-in-law, how her sister had found receipts, evidence of another woman. "You can't trust any of them," Brenda had said with a laugh. "You have to check their pockets." The casual remark planted a seed of poison in Helen's own mind. That night, while Frank was asleep, snoring softly in their bed, she went through the pockets of the work jacket he had thrown on a chair. Nothing. She felt a wave of relief, and then of shame for her suspicion, but the seed had taken root. She found his toolbox in the garage. In a small, zipped compartment she had never noticed before, she found them. A stack of folded bank slips, receipts for wire transfers sent every month for 7 years to a name she didn't know, Savannah Reed, and beneath them, tucked into a small plastic sleeve, was a photograph, a school picture of a smiling, gap-toothed boy. On the back, in Frank's familiar scrawl, it said, "Dylan, age 6, my son." The words echoed in the silent garage, a death knell for the life she had known. The love didn't die that night, she said, her voice dropping lower. It had been dead for years. What died was the hope, the illusion. What took its place was clarity. I saw him for what he was, a liar, a thief. He had stolen my youth, my devotion, my life, and given it to someone else. He had built another family on a foundation of my silent, lonely work. The sadness, the years of accumulated neglect and quiet desperation did not explode into rage. It crystallized. It became something hard and cold and sharp. It became a plan. I didn't want a divorce, she stated, as if explaining a simple business decision. Divorce is messy. It's public. People talk. And he would have given her everything. The house, the money. I would have been left with nothing, a middle-aged woman with no skills, no life of her own. He took my life. I was not going to let him take my future too. So she planned. She remembered the old stories about devil's breath. She knew where to find it. She harvested it with the same care she tended her roses. She prepared it with the same precision she used to bake her pies. She tested it to be sure. She didn't want him to just get sick. She wanted an ending, a neat, tidy, permanent solution. And the money. Just days before the murder, she had gone to the bank and withdrawn over half of their joint savings, a large sum of cash she had hidden in a safe deposit box under her maiden name. It was not a crime of passion. It was a severance package, self-administered. She described the final night with no emotion, serving him the stew, watching him eat, her placid smile as he commented on the bitter taste, her feigned panic, her perfect scream. There was no remorse, no guilt. In her mind, she was not a murderer. She was a victim who had finally, decisively fought back. He was a disease in my house, she said, her final words in the interview room hanging in the air like poison gas. I was simply the cure. Helen Miller was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The story shocked Ridgeback County to its core, shattering the placid surface of their quiet lives. The model wife was a monster. The perfect home was a slaughterhouse. The community looked at their neighbors, at their own spouses, with a new, chilling flicker of doubt. For Savannah Reed and her son Dylan, the tragedy was absolute. They lost the man they loved, their provider, and were left to face a future colored by scandal and loss. They were the other victims, the collateral damage of a war they didn't even know was being waged. The Miller house still stands, but it is no longer a home. It is a monument to a terrible truth. The grass is overgrown, the windows are dark and vacant, the paint is peeling. The real horror of the story wasn't the poison or the brutal, agonizing death of Frank Miller. The real horror was Helen. It was the chilling reminder that evil doesn't always come with fangs and claws. Sometimes it comes with a pleasant smile, a helping hand, and a hot meal on the table. It grows quietly, patiently, in the dark, neglected corners of a human heart, until it is strong enough to kill. And it leaves you with one terrifying, unanswerable question. How well do you really know the person sleeping next to you?